Well, I am thrilled beyond compare to be talking with Dr. K today. Actually, Dr. K, Lisa, is the author of quite a few books, but the one we're going to talk about today is called Amore Vegan Ethics. And I had the opportunity to read this book, and I would say that each section could be a book unto itself. I was particularly interested in the religious section in light of everything that's going on in the world right now, that if people would eat with more compassion, probably a lot of the problems we're dealing with, we wouldn't be dealing with. But we'll get into that conversation. So, Lisa, great to have you here.
Welcome to the Vegan Visibility Podcast Show, where your host, Kathleen Gage, shines the spotlight on vegan and plant-based businesses and entrepreneurs from all walks of life committed to cruelty-free eating, healthy lifestyles, animal compassion, and the environment. Enjoy the show.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
So I'm curious, how long have you been vegan?
About 45 years.
Oh my. Okay, so let's take a trip down memory lane. And how did you first come to realize 45 years ago, when people weren't even, I don't even know if that term was used very frequently. I know it was 1948 when they coined the phrase, but not too many people knew what veganism was. And it was kind of, you were an outlier. And so tell us about that.
Well, it's a really hard question to answer because it wasn't a vegan movement then. And we didn't have, there wasn't this clear thing that you go vegan, you kind of go vegetarian and then eventually you go vegan. And I didn't really know when it happened. What I know is my sister sent me a pamphlet from PETA on downer cows. And I'll never forget it. And that was it. That was the start of the change. And then over time, I learned more. I just kept learning. And as I learned, I changed. So the start was about 45 years ago. And then it took some time. And, in those days, too, now the vegan movement, there's even people who, if you buy products from a company that's not vegan, it's not vegan enough. So by their standards, it took me a very long time to get anywhere close to vegan. So the definitions have changed. What it means to be vegan, it didn't exist when I first started to change. And it's not an easy thing to pinpoint. And you did without things in those days. It was a very different way of being vegan.
Right. And, there's the health side of being a vegan, which is more leaning towards plant-based. There's the compassionate side, which has to do with the animals. There's climate change in the environment. And we have people that actually are climate change deniers. I definitely want to talk about that. Because I'm a baby vegan compared to what you've been doing. I started a little over 5 years ago. And initially I started for health. I didn't want anything to do with being vegan because I thought vegans were crazy. And now I know we are. And that's interesting. But what's really amazing is that I've been involved in animal rescue for so many years. And I actually worked within the pet industry at one point. And it's kind of interesting how you can rescue animals on the one hand and then eat them on the other, or a lot of effort goes into rescuing that dog or that bull or that goat or whatever, and yet you go home to a chicken meal. So let's talk a little bit about the ethics of being vegan, because that's actually what your book is called, is Vegan Ethics. So how do you explain to somebody about the ethics of being vegan?
An important thing to remember is who you're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to touch them. If they say they're an environmentalist, then you want to go to the E of Amore, which is environment. If they have a strong religious background, you want to go to the R, which is religion. So you want to know who you're talking to and focus on the things that matter to them. And it's one of the things I think, one of the mistakes this movement makes is that, at least for years, we were kind of a one statement way of going vegan. And to this day, we ignore the religious element of it largely. And in my experience, it's probably the most powerful and the most effective way, because people who are committed to a religion, if you say to them, this is what your religion basically teaches compassion, here's what's going on. How do you mix those two together like that? How do you keep saying you're a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu? And in my experience, they actually care enough to change 9 times out of 10.
And what is it that gets people to make that change? Where do you find the tipping point to be?
Well, again, it depends on what you're working with. The environmentalists are much harder. It doesn't matter what it's much
Hmm.
harder.
Hmm.
The evidence is overwhelming. To my mind, you cannot have integrity and be informed and call yourself an environmentalist and still be eating animal products. But
Right.
that is the way of it. And no matter what you say, they tend to hold the line. Not so with religious people, because their salvation is at stake. The stakes are much larger. In the environmental movement, you go vegan, you're probably going to be shunned. And in the religion element of, if you don't go vegan, something so huge is at stake, something so deep to your core, that it's more likely to be fruitful, which is why, as in retiring and focusing on tapestry, religion is one of my primary focuses. It's being ignored by the movement, and it's a really effective and important area.
And especially in light of all that's going on in the world right now. And I found that section of the book to be so fascinating, where you talked about Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, so many different religions where compassion really is the foundation of the religious movements. And yet a lot of people don't understand that when you're consuming animals, you're not being compassionate. And, I had a situation recently. I live in a rural community in Oregon, outside of Eugene, and we don't even have a stoplight in town. That's how rural we are. So obviously there are a lot of cattle farmers, goat farmers, and that's just kind of the culture here. I was out shopping at the we call it the tractor store, and I think that's the name of it, the tractor store. And the clerk, when I went up to the to cash out, she said something about being in a lot of pain, and I said, "Well, what's going on?" She goes, "Oh, I have fibromyalgia." And I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "I just interviewed a doctor that wrote a book on curing and conquering your fibromyalgia." And she goes, "Oh, I would do anything to get rid of the pain." I said, "Anything?" And she goes, "Anything." And I said, "I'll tell you what, I'll bring you the book. Go ahead and read the book." And I said, "Here's a couple of the foundational pieces. You have to give up dairy." She goes, "Oh, I don't do any dairy." "And you have to give up meat." She goes, "Oh, I would completely shifted. Her energy shifted completely."
Yep.
She goes, "I would never give up meat. My son raises beef for slaughter." And she used the term slaughter. And I'm like, "Oh my gosh." And that's how he makes his money. "I can't betray my son." And I thought, wow, that's so interesting that you're dealing with such pain, but the pain of betraying a family member whose revenue and income depends on killing animals. That's pretty interesting.
Fascinating story.
I run into these type of stories frequently, because where I have the best conversations is at the grocery store or at stores. And when they give you a little tiny bit of entree into what they're dealing with in their life. And I'll say, "Well, do you really want to know?" And when they say yes, and some people are receptive, but 90% of the time people are so off put by the word vegan. And so I use plant-based eating. I try to use terms, like you say, meet them where they're at. But let's talk about tapestry, and then let's get into the book. What is tapestry?
Well, I retired comparatively very early, and I wanted to do activism. I wanted to stop doing anything for anything outside of what matters most to me, which is animal activism and animal liberation.
Mm-hmm.
Animal, by the way, it means any species other than the one that I am. So it's a way for me, especially, it's a tool for writing. I don't have to do this non-human, the longer version. It's very simple, it's short, and it isn't othering. So when I say animal, it's every species except the one who's speaking. So it could be a chimp or, a parrot.
Mm-hmm.
But it's every species except the one of the speaker. So I wanted to focus on animal liberation. That's what I do. And I realized that I've been teaching in Montana for a lot of years, and I learned a tremendous amount there, and a lot that's very applicable to what I'm doing with tapestry. But now I full on focus on what I'm doing, what I want to do, which is just the activism that really, it's why I got a doctorate in philosophy so that I could do this at the teaching level, that I got out of it so that I could do what I wanted just as an activist. So Tapestry's main focus right now is creating a gigantic website, and Judaism's up, Christianity's going up. I'm working on getting the funding to put Christianity up. And then after that, probably Islam. Then I'll go into the Asian traditions, and it's going to be 7 to 9 faiths. And already there's the book out, Animals and Judaism and Animals and Christianity. Both of those are out. And those are each each one will have a book that goes with it for those that want the book, but it will be free online for anyone in any country that wants to see it. And Amore is going to be the same. I'm working very hard to get this book online for free so anyone can access it. That's the goal. Selling books is nice. It supports the websites, but at the end of the day, I want to get the information out there, so it's going online as soon as I can make that happen.
Wonderful, wonderful. And what would it take to make that happen?
Just Tapestry needs donations. Websites cost. They each have their own fees, their annual fees, and then I have to pay someone to do much of the work for me. And I have a choice. I can either do everything myself, which really slows down the process.
Right.
Or let others do what they do and I can do. And vegan hacktivists have been fabulous at helping. They got Judaism up for me and they do it for free. They're a fabulous organization. So know them. They're out there for animal activists that need help with their websites, and they are terrific. But they can only do so much. And they really did more for me than they normally do for anybody, because it's such a huge website. Even if you do just Judaism, it's huge.
Your website's great. Now, how would people make donations? Like, let's talk about that. Where can they find you? What's the web address? And then how would people make those donations?
If you go to lisakemmerer.com, click on Tapestry, and publications are there, by the way, as well. And you just go into Tapestry and it has a donations website.
Okay. And we'll make sure to put that in the show notes so that people can easily click through and make that donation. Because, there's a universal law that when we put out and we give, we tend to get more in return. And so I do encourage people to check out your website, make those donations, because we all have our own personal areas that are important to us. And animal rescue happens to be very important to me. We've got 3 horses who are rescues. We've got 2 chickens who are rescues. And I actually had somebody say, how can you have chickens if you're a vegan? And it's like, well, I'm not eating the chickens. It's like, there's such a disconnect.
Wow.
Let's talk about your book, Amore and Vegan Ethics. And they can get this on your website. They can get it on Amazon. They can get it pretty much wherever books are sold, I would imagine. When did you first get the idea to write the book Amore? How did you come up with the acronym Amore? Tell us what each letter means, and then let's talk about religion specifically.
Okay. So Amore came about because it is an acronym for all I thought a long time about how can I remember all of these when I'm trying to give a talk? And I needed something that was meaningful and that would remind me when I'm on the spot trying to speak, all the different things I needed to bring up. And I thought, Amore, Italian for love. Perfect. So after a long process of writing things down and trying to figure them out, I came up with Amore to remind me. And then after I retired, and especially when COVID came, and I thought, how am I going to get this information out there? I'm going to put it in a book. And there is no book out there. There is no one out there that covers all of these 5 reasons. Religion is usually left out. That's the main one. But of course, often one or the other is left out, or 2 even. But this book is very tiny. It is concise. It gives activists and educators and people who are interested the absolute core, basic, most important moral reasons to rethink what we're eating. And that's the point of the book. It's an easy read. It's an easy buy. It's right around $10. I try to keep it affordable. And as I say, soon it will be free online. And it's a way of just letting everybody know the moral reasons why we need to go plant-based or vegan or rethink what we're eating, at least cut back on everything. Whatever step people are at, this book helps them to get there.
I love it. And let's start with A. Let's go to More. Amore. Now I know the right way to say it. Amore. A typical Westerner. Amore. Okay. So
sure.
Let's start with the A. What does the A stand for?
Animal suffering. That's all the other species that we exploit. And usually if I talk about all 5 of them, and I encourage others to do this too, I'll hit up dairy, because it's the one that people tend to see the least reason to let go of, and they're most addicted to. So if you can get them there, the rest of the process falls in. That's where the greatest number of the longest term suffering goes on for the cows and their calves, the veal. And the thing is, people are vegetarian because they think they're not killing. And so pop that bubble with 1 sentence and you're already on the path. So Amore is for the animals who are the core of our movement and the core of the reason most of us went vegan. But for most people, it's important, but it's not going to be the number 1.
Right.
Next is the M for medical. And that is the reason many people go vegan, is for their own health, right? And as you say, you did. This is fairly common. So it's important to have it in there because people who can't hear anything else, they're really, truly only interested in themselves. They don't care about the environment. They're not worried about a God or a religion or any, ideals or animals. None of that matters to them. This is a very important first step. So know the key things that people need to do. And the book kind of lists them, for instance, cancer, heart attack, strokes, big killers that people really fear, and how by changing our diet, we can protect ourselves. So That's what the M is for.
Okay.
Now this is the most complicated one. And again, this is one that is often left out of books, or books will focus just on this one and maybe touch on others. O is extremely important, I think, in this day and age. And it is this book is written for activists. This is the one I think that activists need to read about. I think that we are overall fairly ignorant of all the reasons to go vegan under oppression, under the O. So I divide that into 3 W's: world hunger, women, and the workforce. So again, I need those to help me. And women really isn't just women. It's racism, ableism, homophobia, transaggression. And this is where ecofeminism and many of my studies in philosophy come in, is that ecofeminists help us to understand. They were interested in how the oppression of the earth and oppression of women were connected. And if you go back, you see that you have this idea of power over, of exploiting, of using you for me. So that attitude ends up affecting different races, different abilities, different species. Mm-hmm. So understanding that core is really important. And also the very capitalistic idea of production and consumption. So you put out for me if you're a woman, if you're an animal, if the earth, you have resources, you're not a tree in your own right, you're a resource for me. So recognizing some of these underlying attitudes, the way we use language to talk about other beings, other people, and the earth are all critical to look at and start changing it ourselves and start working into our activism so that we don't. I mean, the movement has been painfully narrow. I know I have been. I was for decades. It took me a very long time to start connecting all these dots. So that's the W, the first W under oppression. World hunger is very easy. The simplest way to talk about this, 70% of our grains are fed to farmed animals and 60% in the EU. So that's an absolutely huge amount of production. And it comes with a loss. You get almost all of the energy is lost, almost all of the fibers lost. Mm-hmm. So it's a terrible waste. I mean, these animals, they're burning up calories, right? They run around, they eat, they have a life. They grow things you can't eat, like horns and hooves and guts and fur. So obviously, this is a terrible waste of resources. So looking at this side of world hunger, that when you are choosing to eat animal products, you're basically thumbing your nose at people who are hungry. We grow plenty of grain to feed everyone on this planet. All we have to do is rethink how we use those grains.
Right.
And by the way, this ties into environmentalism, because about more than 60% of our lands could be returned to wild if we were so inclined, if we stopped using them to grow grains to feed into these billions of living beings that we're growing to eat. So that's the second under the O. And the third one, workforce. The workforce. So no one is born with the idea that they want to spend all day slaughtering and dismembering living beings. No one would want those jobs. It's disempowered people. So as you can see, these 3 are very much for those who are busy with social justice and are leaving animals out of the equation. This is a way of getting them to connect with the vegan movement and with animal liberation, and recognizing that if you care about people, you need to change what you're eating.
Right. So then we have the R.
The religion portion. And as you know now, this is huge, right? There's the Chinese religions, there's the Indian religions, there's the monotheistic religions. And so I do each one. I spend a little time on each one of those, making sure that people understand if you're inside that religion, or if you know someone inside that religion, knowing about that religion. And this is where education is so essential for activists. All this information, we have to have all of it. And there's just an absolute gigantic hole in our understanding of religion, so that when we have a Christian friend who couldn't care less about what they're eating, we need to understand what Genesis says. Genesis, God creates a vegan world. vital. And of course, they're going to jump right to Genesis 9 and say, yeah, but then God gives us everybody. As I gave you the seeds and the green things, you can eat everything now. You need to know how to reply to that. You need to say to them, well, yes, but it's clear there in Genesis 9. If you look back to Genesis 6, we were a failure and an embarrassment. It was violence and corruption.
Hmm.
And so God said, okay, I try to flood you out. Okay, that I don't want to. Okay, then God kind of says, okay, I won't ever do that again. And now I just accept that you maybe aren't quite what I wished you would be. And I give you everything. I accept your violence. But the question for Christians is, and Jews, and really Muslims too, who also, Genesis, one of their sacred books, is not core like the Quran. But especially for Jews and Christians, the question to ask themselves, really, what did God want? Are you trying to be the best you can be in your faith? Or are you just trying to sneak by with what Genesis 9 says that you can sneak by? And I think, too, with all of these religions, seriously, does anyone think that a religion is going to teach cruelty? I mean, once you've covered animals, the first chapter, you know there is no religion that is going to support what's going on, what we're doing. So again, and if you look at Eastern faiths, they have a whole different set of really fascinating teachings, like karma and reincarnation, where you have the sense that every living being is you. It's your sister, it's your mother, it's your best friend. Their Atman, their soul, is inside this different creature, this different being. And so there's this sense of ahimsa, of non-harm, of live and let live, of kindness and generosity and looking after other beings because of this connection. So really core to their teachings and much harder to get around. The catch with these Eastern faiths is dairy was non-cruel when these developed, right? They truly just shared the milk with the calf outside their window, the cow. They didn't slaughter, they would never slaughter a cow. But now it's cruel. So the education part is letting them know that what's going on now is cruel and it's no longer consistent with your religious teachings.
Right. Well, and it's so interesting because I remember growing up and seeing the propaganda about what was happening in India, how the people were starving and the cows were walking freely. And, that if they were kind people, they would slaughter the cows and feed the people. And just the propaganda that we've been fed through all the different areas that you cover in your book and so brilliantly. I do encourage people to get the book. We're going to take a step back after we go through E. Let's cover E. And then, I've got so many questions that I knew I would have a lot of questions, but as I hear you speak, it makes me realize how important your message is to get out there.
Thank you. I think it's extremely important for activists. We have to have these tools to bring change. So environment, again, it has 5. Let's see if I can remember them all. So soil degradation, deforestation, the climate change, the atmosphere, water pollution, and freshwater reduction. Those are the 5 key problems facing us environmentally. And every one of them, every last one of them, the main contributor is animal agriculture. Every one of them. And most of them are simple. So climate change is the one that's covered the most, the contribution to greenhouse gases. It's pretty well known with methane, at least in our movement. If not, it's in the book, read it, or find anyone. There's a number of books that cover that. But again, not many books cover all of it. And I have another book out there, it's called Eating Earth, that really focuses on all of these. So the important thing to know is, again, if you're an environmentalist, and informed and sincere, there is simply no way to keep eating animal products. So our job is to make sure that they're informed.
Well, and what's so amazing about all of this is when I first went plant-based, and again, I wasn't going to be vegan. I didn't consider myself vegan because I didn't understand what it meant to be vegan. I didn't realize it was a philosophy and a lifestyle. It wasn't really about a diet. And so for me, it was about, I had inflammation. I was 64 at the time. It was time to do something about it. Read Eat to Live by Dr. Joel Fuhrman, which that is a gateway book for a lot of people. And it was about 6 months into my journey of being a plant-based eater and just saying, I will never be a vegan. I'm at the grocery store walking by the meat department, and I had an experience that I've heard quite a few people have. I had a visceral response to looking at the packaged meat, and I could feel the suffering. I heard the screaming. I mean, it was just like I was almost in an altered state, and it was like, oh my gosh, I am vegan. And even as I share that now, I feel that sadness of how ignorant I was.
Mhm.
But what I know to be true is there are layers that get stripped away, and we learn more and more and more, because it's like with the environment. Most of us do think of climate change, and most of us do think of the weather patterns. But when you realize that the water, like around factory farms, what's being put into the water system, and
Yeah.
that's going into people's homes, and the whole thing about oppression, when you talked about, who would want to work at a slaughterhouse? Most people wouldn't, but those are the oppressed people that are working there. And there have been studies, and I'm sure that you could go much further into this than I could, but the studies about the people that work at factory farms, the amount of abuse that goes on at home, because
Mhm.
when you go
Yes.
from that environment, where do you take it out? You take it out on the people closest to you. There's a lot of alcoholism, drug
Yes.
addiction, spousal abuse, child abuse, as a result of what people are subjected to. So, with your book, with the religious section, the religion section that you have, with what's going on in the world right now, in Ukraine, what's going on in China, what's going on in the Middle East, how much do you think that is directly a result of what people consume?
Well, if you look at most of our fights are over what we call resources.
Right.
So, given that the resource problems stem from our diet, I would say that's the core right there. That we, for example, just the water needed to keep all of our animals eating all the grains that require water
Mhm.
and drinking, you would have to flow an entire annual flow of the Amazon, which is it has the biggest flow of any river, 4 times. That's 4
Mm.
years of water just to keep the animals fed and drinking. So if you want to save fresh water, right, which is going to be probably what the next wars are about rather than oil, that's how you do it. You stop breeding animals that need water.
Mhm. Hmm.
You bring up that idea of under oppression, that the oppression of sexism and families. And I just wanted to say there's a woman in Canada, Amy, who has done fabulous studies on that. I mean, the actual studies where a slaughterhouse came into a community and she actually looked at incidences of domestic violence rising. So I'm
Wow.
sorry, I can't remember her name, but that's an important thing to clearly mention. And the other part you mentioned, again, part of oppression. Nobody wants to live near these god awful
Mhm.
industries. They
Mhm.
smell, they pollute, infant mortality goes up. So again, living near one of them is a form of oppression because you're powerless. It's powerless people that end up living near these industries that destroy the environment and harm health and can seriously harm and kill, especially young people.
So as we learn what the truth is, and you've been doing this for over 4 decades, where you just are so well spoken on the topic, you're educated on the topic, this is your life's work.
Mhm.
For the people that have not really, if you will, seen the light yet. I mean, they think that we're conspiracy theorists. They think that we try to really shove our beliefs down their throat, literally. When in reality, we are destroying our planet day by day. We're destroying people day by day. We're destroying the animals day by day. How do we educate people beyond doing podcast shows, beyond doing articles, beyond writing books? What are some of the first steps that people can take to become an activist?
Oh, it's a wonderful question. So one of the things I would say is never start with your family.
Okay, that's number one rule. It's like I've had to learn that one the hard way.
And I'm sorry. So, right, we need to say these things. Don't start. They're your family. They're stuck with you. Don't victimize them, if you will. So, I have a friend here in where I live who she's 70 something and she went vegan, just started hanging around with me. We became friends, started doing things. I never said a word to her. She came to know I was vegan because, well, sometimes there would be food involved. And I didn't know she'd gone vegan until one day she said, I just can't leave cheese off. And I'm like, huh? I had no idea she was going vegan. And I said, let's go shopping. So off we went, and I showed her all the different products. She loves the cheeses. That was the end of it. She went vegan. So I think with activism, less is more oftentimes, setting the example. And I think another thing being careful of, you're right, we have a really bad name, especially when you're eating. Never bring it up. If somebody excludes you, well, you have to decide how to handle that personally. But those are very individual choices.
Right.
But my suggestion is never bring it up, especially at the table. And they will bring it up, right? They're going to bring it up. They can't possibly eat with a vegan without bringing it up. And then you want to say to them, you asked me a question. Are you sure you want me to answer it?
Right.
Because if you don't, later they'll accuse you of bringing it up again. So make it really clear that they brought it up, and double check that they do want you to answer. So that's just a simple way of trying to be an activist that doesn't get a bad name, that keeps peaceful relations. And I think in doing that, you have a better chance of bringing change.
Wonderful. So, it's so interesting because I've been sober for 40 years, and I belong to a Facebook group of sober women. It's called Sober Sisters. And one of the big addictions that a lot of people in recovery have is with sugar. That's sugar is the big one. Yeah. And there's the, no added salt, oil, sugar to the plant-based way of eating. And it was so interesting because I was watching this dialogue go on with mostly new people where they're like supporting each other in their addiction to sugar, saying, well, you're not drinking, so that's a good thing. And then I popped in and I said, it's great that you're not drinking, and that is a good thing. However, you have to realize that the sugar is as much of an addiction as the alcohol, the cocaine. Yeah. If anything, it might even be more so. And so I think that we have to look at all the different areas of where our addictions to certain foods come from because of the food manufacturers. Yes. And that's part of the oppression. If you keep people hooked on certain foods, like cheese, for example, and a lot of people, they say, I can do everything, like your friend, I can do everything but cheese. I just can't give cheese up. And then when you educate them, oftentimes people are surprised at how addictive it really is. So with more of what you're doing, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years with what you're doing? And where would you, if you could wave a magic wand, where would you like to be with all of this?
5 to 10 years. I believe that this website will take me 5 to 10 years to complete.
Okay.
So I'd like to have every book out for every religion, all of it free online on the Animals and Religion, animalsandreligion.org. That's the website that now has Judaism and hopefully will soon have Christianity. So I'd like to have all of those done. And I continually work on articles and other books. Now, recently I have one out called Oppressive Liberation that looks at sexism in the movement. Our movement needs a lot of work. So also trying to do that kind of work to help us to grow and be more inclusive, to get the compassion's at the core of it. And if compassion's at the core of it, then we have to be inclusive. That oppression that includes all of humanity, the earth, animals, and especially remembering that how we treat each other in the movement makes an absolutely huge difference.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. K, Lisa, it's been delightful to have you on the show. And I encourage people to go visit your website. We'll put the link down in the show notes. And could you give that web address one more time?
LisaKemmerer.com or tapestryofpeace.org are the two main ones. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you so much. You're inspirational.
Thank you. It's been truly delightful. And I encourage people to get your book. It's called Amore, and it's Vegan Ethics. And it will be free at some point in the future. But for right now, the money will help Lisa do the work that she's doing. And it'll help to move the movement forward so that people can really educate themselves on the different aspects of what it truly means to be vegan and live in a vegan, compassionate world. This is Kathleen Gage with Vegan Visibility, encouraging you. Go out and do the right thing. Have a great day.
You've been listening to the Vegan Visibility Podcast Show. Be sure to subscribe to get notified when the next episode is live. And we always appreciate reviews. Join us next time for more inspiration education, and motivation to build your business one cruelty-free and healthy person at a time.